Okay, here we go.
Okay, great. Could I have the first slide then? Welcome to our presentation. My name is Barbara Dumoulin. I am the chair of CAMEUS. CAMEUS, and we'll bring up the first slide so we can move. So this is our presentations, Justice for Women Amid North America's Immigration Policy Shift. I want to thank all of the people who worked on the presentation behind the scenes and for our speakers that we have for today. Next slide, please. So, CAMEUS, who are we? We are the North American Regional Coalition of Graduate Women International National Affiliations. Canada, the name, of course, is taken from the first two letters of our respective countries. So, Canada is CFUW, the Canadian Federation of University Women. Mexico is FEMU, Federación Mexicana de Universitarias. USA is WGUSA, Women Graduates USA. Before we go on, I'd like to draw attention to our logo, which is comprised of three monarch butterflies. Now, the monarch butterfly is incredibly fragile on the one hand, but also very tenacious. It migrates from Mexico through the United States to the northern part of the US and to the southern part of Canada. So we consider this to be an excellent representation of women and children that migrate from the south to the north through our respective countries. It was designed by an artist in Mexico, Glenda Hirscher. Next slide, please. So our leaders, before we go on, I'd like just to recognize the presidents of our respective organizations. CFUW, Linda Sestock, FEMU, Morella Feingold, WGUSA, Susan Nencio, and GWI, Pat Patton. Next slide, please. Our host, I should point out before I start introducing Kathleen, each year, one of the respective organizations takes the charge of paying for and hosting this particular event. This year's host is Women Graduates USA, and the moderator is Kathleen Lorella. She's also the person who ended up having most of the work, shall we say, uploading all of our information to the Whova platform. So thank you very much, Kathleen, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. It's got to remember the mute.
Yes.
Yeah. We have immigration experts speaking today, and we'll have time at the end to have questions and answers. So please put your questions in the chat box, and Grace Hollett and I will monitor these. If you do have a question of a particular speaker, indicate that. If you do use your raised hand on the screen, we will call on those to be asked after all the chat questions are done. We know we never have enough time for what we want to talk about. The top policy issue that the United States president ran on for his current term in 2024 was that of cracking down on immigration, of which the laws had greatly needed revisions for some time. However, immediately after his inauguration, instead of going to Congress for debate and to enact new laws regarding immigration policies, he put into place draconian changes by presidential decree, not through laws passed by the Congress. Legal challenges to such presidential actions take many months or even years. As a result, immigrants have been affected by the stripping away of the rights of those seeking asylum at the southern border, especially, as well as those of many immigrants already living in the U.S., regardless of their legal, pending, or even citizenship status, or how long they had even been residing in the U.S. Some of this has occurred using violent methods. The temporary protected status of people escaping danger in their countries such as Afghanistan, Somalia, Haiti, and Myanmar has been revoked, and our neighboring countries, Canada and Mexico, have taken actions with their own countries' laws and practices in response to how these policy changes have affected the people, including their immigrants in their own countries. Today, we are sharing some of the impacts, particularly on women and girls in the U.S. and our neighbors, Mexico and Canada. We will start with an overview of the changes in U.S. policies affecting legal and undocumented persons and asylum seekers and citizens in the U.S. that are now impacting all of North America. Each speaker will be introduced before she speaks. JD Kathleen Bush Joseph is a policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute based in the United States. She is an expert in removal proceedings, asylum, and refugee law with experience at the National Immigrant Justice Center and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Kathleen is a graduate of Georgetown University and UCLA School of Law. Please, Kathleen, provide the overview.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I want to start out with a really warm thank you to our wonderful hosts and to you all for joining. It's great to be here with you virtually. And as Kathleen was saying, my role today is to give a kind of overview of what's happening with U.S. immigration policy right now, the highlighting in particular some of the policies that are really affecting women and girls in the United States. So I'm not seeing my slides currently, but hopefully they're going to pop up in a second here. And I'll just highlight that as a kind of plan for what we're going to blow through today, because there is so much that we could talk about. Thank you. All right, great. If we can go to the next one. I was going to just talk about how there's really been a remarkable increase in the number of arrests, the number of people detained in immigration detention every day, as well as the deportations that are happening. And then we'll highlight some of those measures affecting women and girls. I also want to talk about some of the data sources that my organization, the Migration Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., has highlighted that you all can be using if you want to know how many immigrants are in your community, for example. And then I want to try to just touch on some of the solutions that are currently being debated in Congress, as there's a real look at trying to add conditions to how immigration and customs enforcement is operating in the United States, for example. So let's charge ahead to the next slide. And what I wanted to highlight here is that at the Migration Policy Institute, we're a think tank that is nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we do think that immigration is a good thing when it's well managed. And our role, we think, is really trying to evaluate some of the policies that are being put forward and then looking at what are potential ways to improve the system. So in January, we put out an evaluation of the Trump administration's first year of immigration policies. And so for anyone who's looking for a kind of overview in written form, would recommend that as a resource. We list, for example, all of those different temporary protected statuses that have been revoked, as Kathleen was mentioning. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that we're really trying to draw out and are still focusing on a lot are how the Trump administration, as it's trying to reach its goal of 1 million deportations per year with this mass deportation campaign, the Trump administration is increasing arrests and detention and deportations to really record high levels. And so since the Biden administration left office, arrests have almost quadrupled when you look at how many people immigration and customs enforcement, as well as customs and border protection, how many people those officers are arresting, not only at the border, but also in the interior of the United States. Now, one of the things that's very hard about immigration policy analysts these days is a lack of official deportations data from the US government. We're not getting the same data sources that we used to, but we do know that more families, women, and children are being arrested. And that's partly due to where these arrests are happening. So under the previous administration, We saw a lot of the headlines and attention on how many people were coming to the US-Mexico border. During this administration, what we have is arrests that are happening at ICE check-ins where people are reporting with the US government and trying to follow the rules. We have arrests happening at the immigration courts. You may have seen some of the reports about that. And then people are also being arrested out in their communities, as we saw with Minnesota and Chicago and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. And so this is changing the fact that it used to be primarily single men who were arrested and deported, particularly people from Mexico and northern Central America. But one of the ways that the Trump administration is really trying to scale up is by increasing the number of immigrants it's detaining per day. So capacity has really increased very rapidly. It's almost doubled up to about 70,000 people per day. Detention actually has dipped a little bit since the so-called border czar, Tom Homan, took over after there was that escalation in Minnesota. So as of right now, there are approximately 63,000 people in immigration detention on average per day. But what I want to highlight here, and particularly for this crowd, is that family detention has been restarted. And so that's really changing the picture of who is detained. And of course, there's a lot of research showing that detention can be really detrimental for children. It affects their development, it affects their psyche. I know that Nurse Sheila is going to talk about some of that in her presentation as well. But there are limits on family detention, and then unfortunately, there's been reporting that those limits are being exceeded and people are being held. Children are being held for longer than they should have. And there are also reports of, in particular, pregnant and postpartum and nursing women who have been detained and deported. And this is a change because the Biden administration had stopped family detention. They were really only detaining pregnant and postpartum and nursing women in exceptional circumstances. But another thing that I wanted to highlight that really affects children and families and women as well are these welfare checks that the Trump administration has instituted to be trying to track down some of the hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied immigrant children who came to the United States over the past few years. And that is also leading to more both children and their sponsors, sometimes family members, sometimes family friends, being arrested and detained. Let's go to the next slide. So here I wanted to highlight again how different it is that the focus of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement is really happening in the interior of the United States, and what a change that is. Because we saw that under previous administrations, immigration officials were quite frankly struggling to keep up with how many people were arriving. And that was also leading to really difficult humanitarian circumstances for migrants who are trying to come, including women and girls. But now border encounters are actually at the lowest level that they have been in decades. And so currently, there are as many people coming in 1 month as used to come sometimes in 1 day to the US-Mexico border. And that's really led to this shift. And it's allowed the Trump administration to be pulling that enforcement machinery into these interior cities, as well as to bring the border officers themselves literally physically into the interior as the Trump administration is using this whole of government approach to mass deportations. Next slide. So as we think about who is already here then and who are the potential targets for this immigration enforcement push, I wanted to highlight some of the work that my colleagues have done estimating the unauthorized immigrant population inside the United States. And they do that using some really well-developed models, and it's based on the US Census Bureau data. And based on that, they've estimated that about 13.7 million unauthorized immigrants lived in the United States as of mid-2023. Now, we've heard about people, including women and girls, leaving the United States because they fear exactly what, we were just going over, which is detention and deportation, potential separation from their children. But unfortunately, we actually don't know as of right now how many people have left. There are estimates that are based on um, the very limited data that we have in the meantime, but it's going to take a bit of time to find out how many people um, are leaving or and who are here currently because there's that data lag. But one of the things that I wanted to draw out here is just how many mixed status families there are in the United States. And my colleagues have estimated that about 6.3 million children under 18 lived with at least one unauthorized immigrant parent in 2023. Now, of those, the vast majority of those children are actually US citizens. And so that's where we're seeing these really difficult choices that families are having to make about a mother trying to decide whether or not she should bring her children with her to, say, Guatemala, or should she leave them behind if she has a trusted caregiver such as a grandmother, an aunt, or someone else who can oversee the children if, maybe she thinks that the mom can come back into the United States at some time. But we know that that's really difficult actually for people to be able to try to come back in based on a visa or other lawful pathway. Next slide. So here, I just wanted to check in. I know we're in a virtual setting, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with the case of Leon Ramos. And if you are, if you want to raise your hand if you're on camera or let us know in the chat. I wanted to highlight his story in particular because I think it really shows, the human side of a lot of what we're covering today, and how, unfortunately, I think that, this experience could happen to a number of more girls and women immigrants in the United States, because the Trump administration is really focused on ramping up and continuing to increase these levels of arrests, detention, and deportation. Okay, thanks for sharing that you hadn't heard about this case, Anna. This was a young boy who ended up detained with his father, and they were sent to a detention facility in Texas. And unfortunately, it looked like he really had a very hard time in detention, as we were talking about, because of the really challenging circumstances. And so there are a lot of concerns about what this is going to mean in terms of lasting effect on these families. And there was really in the United States a big outpouring of discontent about the family situation and what happened in this case in particular. Next slide. Okay, so we've already gone through a lot, and thank you for hanging in with me as I'm trying to quickly highlight a lot of these different policies. But some of what we think of when we're hearing about the push to be deporting the worst of the worst, quote unquote, and the unauthorized immigrant population. I think there's a little bit less awareness of what's happening in terms of legal immigration and how some of those restrictions and some of these measures are actually also affecting people who did have some type of protection, whether that be temporary or even people with visas, with green cards, and as well US citizens. So here, I wanted to highlight the revocation of the temporary protected statuses, which have been granted by many administrations in the past. And due to large increases under the previous administration, this temporary protected status was actually covering more than 1 million people who were already in the United States and didn't have another form of permission to stay in the United States, but we deemed their countries unsafe to be sending them back to. And one example here is Haiti. There were more than 300,000 people protected by temporary protected status. And the Trump administration has sought to revoke those statuses. Many of those decisions have actually been blocked by federal courts. And the Supreme Court actually just agreed the other day to hear arguments about whether or not the Trump administration should be able to move forward with taking away those statuses. And the reason that it wants to do that is to be able to deport these people because temporary protected status provides relief from deportation for up to 18 months. And it also comes with work permission. So that's actually a key thing that a lot of businesses and economists are looking at when they're trying to evaluate the effects of the Trump administration's policies is how many of these people are working in the United States? And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'll just quickly mention that the Trump administration has also sought to end the humanitarian parole status that allowed more than a million people to come into the United States or who are already here to stay as well, similar to temporary protected status. And that status was awarded to Afghans, for example, after they fled that country. And it was also granted to Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And that means now that we have hundreds of thousands, if not more than a million more people facing deportation proceedings than were before. Now, a lot of families and women and children were protected by these statuses in particular. And so, we're going to have to watch out to see how many of them are able to obtain legal representation, perhaps are able to apply for asylum or another path to stay in the United States, although there have been a lot of restrictions added on asylum as well, and that's making it more difficult for this population to be able to try to stay in the United States. Now, there are also measures such as terrorist organization designations. There are travel bans for nationals of many, many countries that are in place right now, again, being challenged in the courts. And then we're also seeing increased scrutiny of people who are trying to come in on visas and to come in with a green card, perhaps because they're reuniting with family members who are already here, or because they're seeking employment, such as there are a lot of doctors in rural areas who used to come in on visas, and that pathway is being scrutinized right now. And so, these measures have the potential to really make it more difficult for people. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip to the next slide and just say that we have a number of tools that you can use on the Migration Policy Institute website to see how many immigrants there are in your state, how many of them are women, how many of them are children. And so that can be useful information if you want to be talking to your local leaders and elected officials about what you would like to see happen with immigration enforcement. I also listed the link to the ICE website, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, where you can see if your local jurisdiction cooperates with ICE to be arresting and detaining and deporting immigrants. And you can actually tell your local sheriffs and police department if you do or do not want them to be cooperating. And I'll just end on our next slide here by highlighting that immigrants are a huge part of the workforce. We know that they're in our communities. And next slide. If we're thinking about how we can get to a better place with our system that recognizes that these people are here, they are contributing, then some of the solutions that are put forward, which maybe we can get more into in the questions, look at what we would need to do to modernize the system to perhaps allow some of these people to stay. In particular, immigrants who were brought here as children and who have previously been granted protections, such as under the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and then farm workers is another proposal. But hopefully, this kind of paints a picture of what a change this is from past administrations and also where all of this could potentially go. So I look forward to your questions and to my fellow presenters' presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Um, I'll call on Faye Weber next.
It's my honor to introduce Dr. Nashila Chan. Nurshila is a public health leader advancing health equity through community-centered innovation. She's the founder of Simply, a platform improving care transition and post-discharge support. She focuses on social deterrence of health inclusive research, supporting U.S. healthcare systems, and mentoring future public health leaders. She is also working with a team to improve middle-income caregiving outcome by providing better support for care transitions and post-discharge support. Nurshila will be talking about the impact of One Big Beautiful Bill and the policy changes on women. It's my honor to present Nurshila Shan.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Faye. And it's a pleasure to be here among everyone. I just want to make sure everyone can see my deck. Okay, perfect. Before I get started, I wanted to just let everyone know that I am a public healthcare practitioner. I work in the state of California in the US, and I have particularly worked around Medicaid. And before I get started on my presentation, I wanted to also mention that the healthcare system in the US is very difficult to follow. So if you're outside of the US, I just want to say brace with us. And also that there are so many layers of care, and we have federal policies that support the U.S. healthcare system, but a lot of the ways that the system operates in healthcare here is each state is responsible for the way that we also implement our services. And another thing that's really important for me to mention in this presentation is I am an immigrant woman. I moved to the US in 1990 underneath the Diversity Visa Act. At that time, it's called the Green Card Lottery System, which many people maybe uh, understand what that is. I believe at the moment it's no longer in existence. But if I had not moved, and I moved here from the Fiji Islands, so I'm Indian from the Fiji Islands, and we moved here during a time when the Fiji Islands was experiencing its own challenges. And it has been an honor to live here in the US. My family has received incredible opportunities, and I live in a state where there is just a global representation of a lot of people. So, having what is going on at the moment currently in the US, it is definitely impacting us, and it also makes me think about what it would have been like if I would have immigrated or have had the chance to immigrate at the moment. But my heart goes out to a lot of this, and I continue to work and support the immigrant populations through my public health commitments and also efforts. So I will give an overview of some of particularly one of the biggest policies that are impacting healthcare at the moment, and it's called the One Big Beautiful Bill. And specifically, I'll mention how it's impacting immigrant women and then primarily directed to women's health. So I'll give an overview of health and immigrants in the U.S. currently, and the I was able to get a lot of this information from an organization called the Kaiser Family Foundation. This is a large nonprofit. They are committed to research, journalism, and sharing data for the public use here in the United States. So, as of June 2025, there were about 51.9 million immigrants residing in the US. About 1 in 4 children in the US has at least one immigrant parent. Again, there has been negative health impacts uh, for a lot of these families, whether you are male, female, men, women, and obviously children, just primarily related to immigrant-related worries if their immigration, if they have had different types of visas, or they're undocumented, or they just have been in dual type of immigration statuses. And also, I should say, like myself, naturalized citizens who keep on thinking about what that may look like for them in the future moving forward. Overall, 15% of immigrant adults report being uninsured as of 2025. And again, this is now reflecting concerns about healthcare providers sharing information with immigrant enforcement officials, which we have been hearing in several states. And it is becoming a very big concern. And I just want to share this data in the right-hand side that in 1990 there were about 13 American children from immigrant families. Now we have over 26%. And I feel like this number is actually even more higher because it's 2026 now. So this data sort of explains, and I'm just going to focus in on the left-hand side underneath immigrant status and how different levels of immigration statuses are being impacted. So again, we have if someone's a naturalized citizen, sort of someone like me, there is an about 29% increased stress, anxiety, or sadness about healthcare and healthcare related challenges. Obviously, we have higher risks now that are involved with problems of sleeping and eating. People delay their care, and that leads to worsened health conditions, and that's being seen over 12% of naturalized citizens. And now moving forward with just lawfully present immigrants, these are individuals that have visas or green cards. They have a 47% increased risk of anxiety or sadness. 28% have reported overall like problems with sleeping or eating, and about 17% report worsening health conditions. And now moving forward with the ones who are likely undocumented immigrants, this again, 77% of individuals that report increased stress, anxiety, or sadness. 57% report about 50 with problems of sleeping or eating, and 35% worsening health conditions. Again, I'm just going to share these three of the immigration statuses and these three conditions, but this I felt that this was really important to share, and as this paints the picture of why we're doing this presentation today and the current and long-term impacts that will occur among individuals of these different immigration statuses. So I'm going to provide an overview of the One Big Beautiful Bill and the immigration policies specifically related to health. The One Big Beautiful Bill was enacted in 2025, so it is very recent. It was last year, and a lot of the policies underneath the bill are going into effect right now. So we don't have the data to show the long-term impacts yet, but we will. And I just want to mention that I work for one of the largest healthcare companies in America, insurance plans, and I work with a lot of healthcare data specifically for the state of California. And I am really concerned about what the current data is going to look like in the next years to come around chronic illnesses, meaning diabetes screening, cancer screenings for men and women, children's health, prenatal babies' health, as well as behavioral health and access to healthcare services. So a lot of this we will see an impact in the years moving forward and potentially even just this year once we get the data coming forward. So the laws and provisions include changes to Medicaid financing and Affordable Care Act, the tax credits. So in America, we have, as I mentioned, the healthcare system is very complex. We have about three different types of healthcare I guess three different kinds of healthcare buckets. So you have either someone is in Medicaid if you have a certain income threshold, or you have commercial health, employee health, and this is either given by your employer here, or you can purchase it through a marketplace, or you're in Medicare, which is over the age of 65. Again, all of these are three different ways of receiving healthcare in the US, and they're financed, meaning money goes into it very differently from the federal and from the state. And the Affordable Care Act was created about 15 years ago during President Obama's administration to really make healthcare much more accessible for those who are between the ages of under the age of 65, because that's where there was a high rate of uninsured populations. So the tax credits are currently going to be impacted because once you remove them, then we're going to see a huge increase in the number of people being uninsured in the U.S. So again, I did want to mention that I'm going to primarily focus in on Medicaid here, which is the lower income health insurance. And here, the revenue that's being provided to Medicaid is going to definitely reduce the enrollment that we're going to see in for health insurance. As a result, we're going to see more sicker populations because there will be an increase in healthcare costs and there will be less financing going into a lot of the support services. Already, we are seeing cuts to some of the most instrumental programs, such as food resources, housing support, as well as transportation. And again, a lot of this has a negative impact, not just on those who are lower income, then it's going to start impacting populations of all different tiers of healthcare. And again, as I mentioned, that each state operates differently in terms of healthcare funding. So we will definitely see limiting financing going into different states and a pushback also from different states. Like California is highly known for pushback for pushing through the system, for also really trying to reorganize our programs and ensuring that everyone in California receives the healthcare that we deserve. But again, the cost of care keeps on going higher and higher throughout the country and also the states that push back. So again, I mentioned that the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, the tax credits will be removed, and if the tax credits are removed, again, we're going to see a high insured and uninsured rates, and this will have a negative impact on all types of health and well-being. And we will also see that there will be a massive uninsured rate too. So some of the general impacts also is going to be caused into sort of the operations of healthcare too. Like it will impact our infrastructure of healthcare, the way that healthcare is communicated from, let's say, California to New York to the state of New York. That infrastructure is going to be impacted, and to any other states around here too. Also, we have this other service which is called value-based care, and this is when a lot of the healthcare systems they get compensated for ensuring that people and populations are healthy. Now, a lot of that, because of the cuts in health, it's going to really impact the value-based care. And one of the largest populations in America that will be impacted also are rural healthcare. Individuals that live in our rural places, that is middle of America, and places where there's massive farmland, where it takes a long time to get to healthcare services. And we're going to see a dramatic shift in the way that individuals in rural places will receive health because of a loss of funding. So now I'm going to really target and go into women's health because this is where we're going to see a massive impact. So the cuts in healthcare is going to truly impact women that are primarily in Medicaid. Currently, over 40% of women are in Medicaid, and also Medicaid in America supports the largest amount of maternal and child health care. So if we're going to see roughly a 1 trillion cut in Medicaid, you can only imagine the effect that's going to have on women and also the broader Medicaid populations. In the US, we also have these services called Planned Parenthood, which are organizations set up throughout the throughout the country, and in states that allow these services to be set up first and foremost, I should say, that provide low or cost-free services for to support mother, child, women's health. And a lot of these if you can now imagine once these important services are losing funding, many of them are going to be shut down, and many and other places are going to see a really big increase in populations, or people are just not going to take their children, their babies, and themselves in for care. So this is highly, highly going to impact the way that women and children and their families receive healthcare. So specifically, as I mentioned, it's going to impact maternal health. The Medicaid cuts threatens progress of maternal health by putting life-saving strategies at risk. Obviously, that's access to health, going in for your primary care visits, for your vaccinations, for food and nutrition, for just any type of health issues that you have because you're going to delay care. Preventative care is also going to be highly impacted right now here in many states. Obviously, as as we get older or due to our life stage, women's services are we go in for our preventative screenings for breast health, for cervical cancer screening, for obviously many different cancer screenings. We have lung cancer and whatnot. And then also for chronic conditions like heart health, diabetes care, and for other types of illnesses that may come up, like or that's related to bone health or pain or uh, any type of behavioral health issues like mental health, a lot of these preventative care services will be lost. And I did also want to mention women who are aging are going to become one of the are going to become one of the largest populations in the US as the aging population here is growing and the younger population underneath the age of 18 is actually shrinking. And we're going to see a lot of elder care individuals who are both in Medicare and Medicaid because they need to be a part of Medicare because they're over the age of 65 and Medicaid because they're uninsured, lose a lot of really primary being in a place that they can't receive the adequate care and support because of their income status or because of not receiving the adequate support that they can. So again, there will be limited, also further, there will be limited reproductive health research and women's health research. Again, this is so crucial because women started to be a part of research studies in the US and I believe around the world more so in 1990. And over the years, there has been instrumental amount of research studies and that to support heart health and to understand more of women's bodies and how it differs from men's and how we need different types of treatments and whatnot. And a lot of this type of a lot of the limitations in funding is going to impact research. And again, another thing that's going to be really impacted is here in the US, we have a policy called the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is called HIPAA. This protects confidentiality. Again, with a lot of these changes in healthcare, a lot of our HIPAA is going to be violated. So this sort of really goes into this diagram explains the impact of the one big beautiful bill and what sort of the populations understand and don't understand. I felt this was really important to share here. You can see that federal spending on border security is going to increase because of the cuts to Medicaid, which we see the impacts of that happening currently in the global state. There will be a federal budget deficit of about 50%. Average taxes paid by Americans are going to go up by 38%. We're already seeing an impact here in the US because of that. I'm just going to go down to the federal spending on Medicare will certainly increase. And we're going to see the federal spending on Medicaid decrease too. So again, many of the provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill is going into effect now, and we won't see the impact of this until much later. We have yet to see the long-term impacts in terms of data, and I'm sure if you're working for a healthcare plan in the US, you're going to see that impact probably occurring now or in the future. And if you are globally coming here, obviously what happens in the US is dramatically impacting global health as well. And what I'm predicting as a public healthcare practitioner is higher rates of unvaccinated children, higher rates of preventative cancers and other chronic illnesses such as diabetes and heart disease, and higher rates of non-communicable illnesses such as viruses potentially going up as well. So I don't want to scare you all because of this. It's just a prediction. But again, healthcare services are so crucial. It is a human right, and having decrease of funding and having people live in fear because they cannot access care, or having them unable to afford care because of their circumstances, is going to very much impact their their health, wealth and being, and as well as the community well-being. And some of the questions to consider, as this is my last slide here, is how can we encourage populations to continue to trust healthcare systems? I work around trust in healthcare systems every day. How do we support women, children, and families to support their long-term health? And what types of innovations can we continue to lead here and create in order to support these efforts? I'm talking about research, I'm talking about digital healthcare for all populations and ages, and accessibility, and obviously I said research, but also funding, types of ways, innovative funding that can also continue to support these efforts. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, so I will hand it back to the organizer. Thank you everyone for this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Nursula. That was excellent. We've now had information about what's happening in the United States. Let's move on to our other countries. And so I call on Laura Costa first to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Barb. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all enjoying this webinar held as a parallel event of the CSW 70. On behalf of the Mexican Federation of University Women, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Elisa Ortega Velázquez. Dr. Elisa is principal researcher at the National University of Mexico in the Institute of Legal Research. She specializes in immigration law, human rights, critical legal theory, and administrative violence. Her work integrates social, legal, and interdisciplinary methods, focusing on child and women's migration, corruption, and governance dynamics in Mexico and across the Americas. Today, she will be sharing her experience on a critical issue within our regional context: administrative violence against migrants, girls, and North American migration governance. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elisa Ortega. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for the presentation, and good afternoon, everyone. And also, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to share this work with you today. And my simple argument is this. In North America, the border no longer operates mainly as a line on a map. Instead, I believe that it functions as a regional governance regime. And that regime produces what I call administrative violence, in this case, against migrant children. This is not only a spectacular violence, it's also harm that is foreseeable and preventable, produced through administrative decisions, delays, and also institutional design. Next slide, please. And next. Thank you. Let me start with a simple image. The border is not only in the desert, not only at checkpoints. The border is now inside the city, in schools, in hospitals, in shelters. And once the border enters those spaces, the question changes. It's not only who crosses, it becomes what happens to children's rights when mobility control colonizes care institutions. Next slide, please. And here is my thesis in one sentence. The contemporary border operates as a regional regime of mobility governance, and it is internalized in the destination country and externalized to the transit countries. Together, these dynamics produce administrative violence against migrant children. And this is comparative, but I'm not comparing two separate worlds. Actually, I'm mapping two phases of the same regional regime. Next, please. In the US, the border is internalized. It moves into urban space, and it's executed with policing logics. In Mexico, on the other side, containment is externalized. It becomes an institutional network, interception, transfers, custody, and delay. So the border becomes a set of procedures, and children become objects of risk administration. So my key claim is this. At some point, risk administration stops managing uncertainty and starts producing vulnerability. Next, please. Uh, oh, no, sorry. The one that was before. For building my thesis, I used three concepts. The first one is the internal border, migration control embedded in the city, penetrating schools, hospitals, and social services. The second one is externalization. Containment displays southward. So transit countries absorb waiting, transfers, and enforcement burdens. And the third one is administrative tutelage. Protection operationalized as a custody without the material safeguards that custody legally requires. Next, please. So let's see what is administrative violence. I understand this category as a harm produced through administration, through paperwork, discretion, delay, transfers, classification, and also institutional omission. Often, this violence is structural. When a system is built to contain, it predictable generates harm. So the point is not only a bad actor or a mistake. The point is how governance produces harm. Next, please. So now let's see children, migrant children case. Why children? Because children trigger a heightened legal protection standard. As you know, international law requires best interest, also special protection against violence, and access to education and health. So children here are a stress test. They reveal whether the regime can comply with its legal obligations. Next one, please. So the backbone is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It imposes positive obligations and heightened due diligence, especially when the state exercises custody or tutelage. And when gender enters, especially for girls and adolescents, CEDAW matters too. Due diligence is not optional. Actually, it's a legal obligation. So this is a legal claim. When the border operates through custody, delay, and institutional fragility, it risks becoming structurally incompatible with heightened protection duties. Next, please. Let's see now sensitive spaces. I focus on schools, hospitals, shelters, and also social assistance centers. These spaces should enable rights for migrants, but when they are repurposed for migration control, their function shifts from care to verification, from inclusion to containment. And for children in special, that shift is not neutral. Next, please. Now let's see the Minneapolis case, which is an example of the internal border. Here, the issue is not only deportation, it's a city-level regime, police cooperation, interior arrest, and fear shaping everyday life. Families adjust behavior, they avoid hospitals, they avoid reporting abuse, and also they avoid public spaces. So the border here becomes urban and it becomes intimate. Next, please. So for children, the impact is immediate. Chronic uncertainty about caregivers, They usually ask themselves, what will my parent be detained today? So school attendance is disrupted, concentration drops, and participation decreases. This is how harm is produced without visible violence every day, through the normalization of insecurity. Next, please. Now, let's go to Mexico as a node of containment. This is the second phase. In Mexico, the system intercepts, transfers, houses, administers applications, and takes custody of children. Through INM, Comar, and DIF, and also social assistance centers, this work is done. So externalization is not abstract, it's institutional, a network governing mobility through waiting, transfers, and custody. Next, please. And here is a critical shift. The language of protection often becomes the practice of custody. Children are protected by being contained and moved while decisions are delayed. But the heightened protection standard for children does not accept "we will fix it later" as the rule. Its core is actually prevention, effective safeguards ex ante, especially in custody. Next, please. So this produces recurring structural failures, non-individualized assessments, delays, fragmented responsibilities, weak oversight, and uneven protocols. And once these features become normal, risk is redistributed onto children. Children pay the price of governance design. Next, please. Now let's see a Mexican case. I call it the Oaxaca case, which makes this painfully concrete. Last February, two Haitian girls died they were on custody of DIF. The immediate narrative is often accident or negligence, but legally that framing is insufficient because the issue does not begin at the moment of death, it begins earlier, with the state taking custody without ensuring the material conditions that custody requires. Next, please. So Oaxaca reveals institutional abandonment. Externalization transforms containment into administrative tutelage. But when tutelage is implemented without safeguards, the border appears as a pattern of omissions, fragile facilities, inconsistent supervision, and also accountability gaps. This is what I call administrative violence, harm produced through institutional architecture and failure to meet heightened standards in custody. Next, please. And when the gender enters, the baseline is the same, children's heightened protection. But the intensity actually of risk changes. For girls and adolescents, risks increase. Sexual violence in transit, trafficking, abuse by state and non-state actors, barriers to justice, and also gaps in sexual and reproductive health support. So protections must be child-centered and also gender responsive. Next, please. So we have the same regime. While in Minneapolis, the border is internalized, also it works with policy logics, fear, family separations, and rights erosion. In Oaxaca, we have an externalized border, containment as a tutelage, custody without safeguards, and institutional abandonment. So we have different modalities, but the same regional regime. Next, please. And so this is measurable. To avoid anecdote, we can measure this regime. We can track indicators that show the shift from risk management to vulnerability production. So this moves us from isolated tragedy to systemic pattern. Indicators include serious act incidents in custody, timelines, individualized assessments, budgets, separation patterns, and gender-sensitive oversight. And when multiple indicators turn red, the system is producing harm, is producing administrative violence. Next, please. Next, please. So we have three takeaways. First, the border is a regional governance regime and not only a line. Second, internalization in North and externalization in the South are connected gears. And third, children, especially girls, reveal whether heightened protection duties are being met or whether risk is being redistributed onto vulnerable bodies, such as children. Next, please. And let's see a final question. My final point is that administrative violence is not always spectacular. It can look like fear, delay, custody without safeguards, and institutional omission. So the question I leave you with is, what would it take, legally and institutional, to rebuild a regional migration regime that does not manage mobility by producing vulnerability in children's life? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elisa. That was excellent. One of the things I just might note is that all of our organizations has a primary focus on access to education, and certainly that is one of the impacts that all these children have lost as a result. Okay, now I'll call on Grace Howlett for the next introduction.
Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Wendy Sulkia, a professor of entrepreneurship and innovation, and the academic director and founder of the Diversity Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University. The Diversity Institute has more than 80 full-time research staff and partners. Projects include Diversity Leads, which has tracked the representation of women in leadership roles, and a host of projects focused specifically on women in technology. Dr. Sukia is the co-author of the bestseller Innovation Nation, Canadian Leadership from Java to Jurassic Park, and she's a former vice president of research and innovation at the Toronto Metropolitan University. She's authored more than 200 articles on aspects of diversity, inclusion, and innovation. And she's one of Canada's leading experts in disruptive technologies, innovation processes, diversity, and inclusion. Dr. Sukir is the academic research director of the Future Skills Center, and she leads the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, as well as the Inclusive Innovation and Entrepreneurship Network. She's received many awards for her work in advancing diversity and inclusion, including the Meritorious Service Cross, one of Canada's highest civilian honors. And most recently, she's received the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion Community Builder Award. She has an MA, MBA, PhD in Management Science, and 2 honorary doctorates. So this presentation will examine the ways in which misinformation has fueled backlash against equality, diversity, and inclusion, and as well immigration, and the impacts particularly on women. And she will also suggest a way forward from this situation. Thank you, Dr. Sukia.
Thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And, I should start by saying that I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territory of Mississauga of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. And university I teach at actually has changed its name as part of its path to truth and reconciliation. I also want to recognize that we're in the second decade of for people of African descent. And both of those perspectives are very, very important in all the work that we do. As well, not in my bio is that I'm the child of a refugee. So many of these issues cut very close to home. So you've heard about the Diversity Institute. Big thing is we're in the business school. And so while we have a deep commitment to social justice and human rights, we're very much focused on why equity, diversity, and inclusion are important for supporting organizations in achieving their goals. And that has to do with accessing talent, driving innovation, responding to the needs of communities, mitigating risks. In Canada, we have a fairly robust legal framework that protects people's rights, and the rule of law in this country is still fairly robust. But we approach this issue maybe a little bit differently. So I wanted to just present a little bit of our views on. I just want to make sure I've got the right. No, I have the wrong slide deck, which is a little bit scary. Just give me one moment, please. Sorry. Yeah, that was an International Women's Day presentation that has some of the same stuff, but a lot of different material than what I really wanted to speak about today. So just need a moment. Holy cow. I'll keep talking and I'll while I locate my presentation. Apologies for that. I had it a moment ago, but it seems to have disappeared. So the perspective we take in looking at immigration and the changes that are occurring presently in Canada and around the world is really through the economic lens and trying to understand how it is we've lost the narrative. Because, plot summary from my perspective is immigrants helped build this country. They built the railroads, they built the houses, they built the businesses, and something has happened in the last few years that has dramatically shifted public attitudes to immigration. And as a result, we've seen shifts in public policy as well. Not to the same extent as you've witnessed, I think, south of the border, but certainly one of the things that we have been puzzling about is the backlash against equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as immigrants, where that came from, what its impact has been, and how we need to respond. And essentially, from my perspective, we experience a lot of spillover effects from the United States, particularly because of the integration of our media. And as a result, much of what you see and hear south of the border, we hear and see as well, even though I would argue our context, our legislation, and frankly, our values are quite different. So I think now I have the right slideshow. So there we go. Yeah, so the big thing to understand about Canada is about a quarter of the population was born outside the country. And if you look at a city like Toronto, more than half the population was born outside of the country, and another quarter are people like me who are the children of immigrants. So in Toronto, 3/4 of the population are either immigrants or children of immigrants, and that has a big impact on our national narrative and story. The other thing is that women are about half of the immigrants admitted to Canada, a little bit more. And we know that immigrant women face particular challenges because of intersecting identities. So they're immigrants, so they face some of the barriers immigrants face. But as women, they face additional barriers. And a very high percentage of the immigrants coming to Canada now are also racialized, which adds layers. Canada has historically had points-based immigration, which is tied to economic goals and objectives and labor market shortages. It's not perfect. We bring people in with PhDs and then they drive taxis, but that has been the foundation of a big part of our immigration system. And we also have some interesting innovations around how we deal with refugees. So there are a number of pathways people can come to Canada as refugees and asylum seekers with major crises like we saw in Vietnam and later in Syria and later in Afghanistan. The government made very bold commitments around bringing refugees to the country. And we have private sponsorship of refugees as well. I led something called Lifeline Afghanistan. And before that, Lifeline Syria, which helped privately sponsor 1,000 refugees. What that means is community organizations and individuals take financial responsibility for settling refugees over a year-long period, and then hopefully that's sufficient time to get them settled. So we have some differences in our legislative frameworks. It's also important to note that increasingly, as I said, the refugees are not coming from Europe, like my father, but from Asia, from Africa, and elsewhere where there's a higher degree of racialization. Most of the immigrants to Canada are, in fact, better educated than people born in Canada because of our point system. And we see that immigrant women are almost 50% more likely to have a degree, for example, than Canadian-born women. We also see, and this is sort of interesting, that currently immigrant women are also more adept with, for example, in-demand tools like artificial intelligence. So I'm talking about economic immigrants as well as refugees and asylum seekers. Yet despite those higher levels of education and skill, we see that immigrant women have lower rates of education than Canadian-born women, although that tends to improve over time. And again, lots of evidence that immigrant women have lower employment rates, both than immigrant men, often their dependents, but also than overall Canadians. And we're really preoccupied with tracking and measuring, trying to understand this, and also look at what interventions will help. What's interesting, and I'm just, if people want the slides, they can have them. But one of the things that's come out of the research is people who hire immigrants hire more immigrants. And so while we know that in employment there is bias if you have a quote foreign sounding last name, which I grew up with, you're less likely to get called for an interview. All of that applies. But once you get an immigrant in the door, their chances of staying employed are quite high. And Canada is a country of small, medium enterprises. 90% of our private sector employment is with small businesses, unlike in the United States, where it's 50%. And once someone gets in the door, they often stay. We also know that there are significant links between people's attitudes to immigration and whether or not they will hire immigrants. We also know immigrants build businesses. Immigrants are more likely to start businesses. They're more likely to export. And in the current environment where we lost our best friend, we are looking for new markets to enter. And my argument is our immigrant diaspora is really a competitive advantage in terms of getting into those new markets. Immigrant women are almost twice as likely to export as Canadian-born women. And in some populations, for example, among Black entrepreneurs, 60% of the Black population in Canada is also an immigrant population. Almost half of Black entrepreneurs in Canada are women, 25% of Chinese entrepreneurs, and so on. And that's higher than the overall Canadian level, which is about 20%. Also, intentions to start business. Immigrant women more likely to do that. Immigrant women more likely to experience discrimination based on gender as well as based on race. And this is a very large study, and it shows that the issues of discrimination are definitely still a problem in Canada, and we have to continue to work on those things. At the same time, this very large study of workers in Canada showed that immigrant women are more likely to be satisfied with their lot in life than Canadians are overall. Again, this is a survey of 5,000 people stratified. You can see immigrant men are slightly more satisfied, but immigrant women are more satisfied than Canadians overall. And that's interesting, is it not, when you think of the other aspects of their experience with employment and so on. However, we have seen something I did not expect to see in my lifetime, and that was this huge backlash in a very short period of time. So we went from 2/3 of Canadians thinking, disagreeing with the statement there was too much immigration to Canada, 69% in 2022-23. And that percentage fell while the percentage of people saying there's too much immigration in Canada skyrocketed to 58%. Why would that happen? And we view it as partly spillover effects from the backlash against immigrants and EDI, a lot of it originating south of the border. We know that the case for equity, diversity, and inclusion is still strong, and we know that there were high-profile advocacy efforts after the murder of George Floyd in Canada, as there were other places, and that our business leaders in general have reiterated those arguments. But there has been deliberate, well-organized political opposition, some of it fueled by foreign interference, some of it simply spillover effects. And because Canada is very dominated by US media, we get a lot of the same stuff that you get. We know that in tough economic times, people look for scapegoats. And there has been some deliberate misinformation. It's a longer discussion about the link between immigration levels and housing prices. And that became a dominant narrative that was fueled by social media and reinforced by mainstream media, even though the evidence is very clear, and it's not just our research, it's Stats Canada, that shows that only 10% of the increase in housing prices has anything to do with immigration levels. And in fact, immigrants build the houses. We have an acute shortage of workers, in part because of the restrictions on immigration. Nevertheless, we have seen some shifting, as I said, in public attitudes to immigration and the immigration levels. Even though most Canadians still see immigration as economically beneficial, they are starting to express stereotypes and views that, in my view, have very little foundation. But you know how these things start to gain ground. We've also seen some backsliding among corporations, particularly those that do business in the United States. While the Bank of Montreal is subject to our employment equity legislation, they've started reframing how they talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion because they work in US markets. And partly as a result of the backlash, we have seen the government very quickly make changes to our legislation, not at the scale that you've seen south of the border, but certainly things that have caused concern. And Bill C-12 is still wending its way through Parliament, but there have been erosions, many would say, of the rights of asylum seekers. The big issue was the cuts, draconian cuts to immigration. And if you look, and this is where a lot of the misinformation came from. If you look at our immigration levels, you can see that in 2021, there was a huge drop, right? Why? Because COVID closed our borders. Following that, there was a spike. It's not exactly proportionate to the drop, but it wasn't system out of control, it was a correction. However, as a result of the backlash and the shifting Canadian opinion, the government introduced very significant cuts across the categories with many unintended consequences. And we've seen, efforts to push back. Nevertheless, there's no question that backlash has had some impact. We have seen a surge in right-wing extremism. There was an inquiry into foreign interference. They recognize that immigration is clickbait as well as a divisive issue. And there's been a lot of evidence to show that this is a constructed crisis. We get spillover from the US. But we also see examples of companies standing strong. And, we did a case study on Costco, and there is some evidence they're doing pretty well as a result of standing firm. One of our tech companies threw his hat in the ring with the US bros, and the response was fast and furious. 200 founders stood up and said, that equity, diversity, and inclusion is critical. And we've seen lots of companies vote down anti-EDI proposals. Unfortunately, a lot of this happened after the cuts. And I would say it was too little too late. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, for example, decrying the government's abrupt changes to immigration policy because all workforce growth in Canada comes through immigration. The boomers are aging out. My demographic is retiring or dying off, and we need immigrants in order to fill the jobs, despite the implications of technology. And so we saw this very acute response from small medium enterprises after the levels were cut. And now government is trying to do some course correction. But many companies talking about the cuts, not just to the foreign worker program, but to the skilled worker program. Where are we going to get our healthcare workers and so on? And in fact, and this is quite ironic, Canadians will recognize, Quebec businesses launched a class action suit against the federal government because of the cuts to immigration level. So, way forward, from our perspective, policy both shapes and reflects values. We need leadership in Canada. We need political leaders who will stand up for Canadian values, which center multiculturalism and immigration, as well as the commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We need to be making decisions based on evidence, not swings in the polls that are fueled by misinformation. We also need to recognize that not all newcomers are the same. There are various differences in experiences, and they require different kinds of supports. And it's important to acknowledge that many of our efforts to integrate and employ immigrants haven't worked very well. After 5 years in Australia, the average immigrant earns 90% of what an Australian-born person earns. In Canada, it's only 50%. We don't recognize foreign credentials. We have problems with discrimination. There's lots that we still need to do. And we need to recognize that entrepreneurship is an important pathway. I love the ad on the left. This was something that was a response to some of the anti-Muslim programs. We don't care what's on your head, we care what's in it. And every time other countries start cutting their immigration, in the past, Canada has actually benefited. We know that these issues are true not just in Canada, but south of the border. Half of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley were born outside the United States. And our national history is one that was built to a large extent by immigrants. They built our national railroads. So for me, I'm old, but for me, the issues are very clear. That we need solidarity. we need to look at allyship, and we need to recognize that when they come for one, they'll come for others. And so I would encourage everybody to, whether they're an immigrant or not, whether they're a child of an immigrant or not, to recognize that this really is a battle that we have to stand together on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and all the speakers. I'll give you time for showing your hands here on the screen for a moment. We appreciate all the content that we've had presented to us today. We have not had any specific questions come up. The primary question that came up, and I think it's been answered on the chat if you haven't seen it, is about whether this recording, including the slides, will be available. And CFUW is the one that's recording this, and Jamie indicates that this will be sent out to all who registered. So those who didn't show up will also be able to access it. I was thinking about one of the early comments that was made, in fact, by Kathleen, in regard to what kind of changes would be most beneficial at this point, whether they're laws, practices, and all the countries would need to be making some changes, some in response to what happens in the other countries, as we've learned today. So I'd like to have each one of you, each one of the speakers, respond to your outlook on what would be some of the best changes that should happen to improve the status of immigrants as a whole. If you'd like to start, Kathleen.
Happy to. Thank you so much. And I think there's a lot that we can pull together from these various presentations. But one of the main threads that I want to draw out here is that, Nurse Sheila was talking about the money from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and some of the changes that that's going to have on the healthcare system in the United States. And I think that that highlights a couple of things. So I'll just quickly say that one of the major aspects of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that Congress passed last year was that it included $170 billion, and that was for immigration enforcement. So that was some $45 billion for ICE to be increasing immigration detention. The goal from the Department of Homeland Security is to be detaining more than 100,000 people per day. And that would really help them get to that place of mass deportations. But what we're already seeing is some of what Wendy was talking about, which is the backlash to that and some of the alarm that's coming, not only from businesses, but also from communities that have been impacted, kind of like what Elisa was talking about. And so there are calls for putting the money from that bill and actually redirecting it to other functions of the US immigration system that remain really underfunded and overwhelmed and outdated. And so the easy example there is that US Citizenship and Immigration Services processes a lot of the applications for immigration benefits like asylum, as well as some of that visa paperwork, the paperwork for temporary protected status that we were talking about. It does a lot of that on paper, but it's the 21st century, right? And so we need to modernize these systems, and they could use a major infusion of some of those resources. And that would actually also help out with enforcement because it means that the system works together and adjudicates the applications of people who are in need of protection, as well as those who are deemed ineligible so that they can be removed. And I think, we can encourage our representatives to be looking at these changes that would pull the system into the 21st century, acknowledging that it is going to take time. But that's why I'm finding this presentation and the information we're hearing really empowering.
Thank you, Kathleen. How about any of the other speakers? Would you like to respond to this question in regard to changes in your own country that would be beneficial?
I can
Go ahead, Wendy.
Try.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, there aren't simple solutions to complex problems. So it really depends on what aspect of immigration you're looking at. I think, at the policy level, certainly the issues around modernization, completely agree with, and ensuring that we aren't selling people a bill of goods and saying you have a PhD in English, come to Canada, and then not telling them there are no jobs for people with PhDs in English and they're going to end up driving Uber. Like that, we have some problems with the mismatch with our economic immigrants that have to be addressed. I'm a big believer in our refugee policy being as open as we can make it, and we need to restart the private sponsorship of refugees. They've closed off a lot of the pathways, and we're sitting on money to privately sponsor refugees we can't use. So there's policy stuff for sure. I think though the narrative, the leadership, the stories are very, very important. And the group for me, it's partly where I live. We need business leaders to stand up and be counted, in my view, on these issues. Because the reality is, I don't think the US is that different in terms of the demographics. The reality is, apart from humanitarian considerations, which are a different pot of policies and things, but if you're looking at economic considerations, we need immigrants and we need business leaders who are willing to stand up based on real economic arguments. It's not about wokeness. It's not about political correctness. It's not about gender or ideology or any of that stuff. It's just economics. We need immigrants, period. And then we also need to think, and I've been really heartened by some of the advocacy in the States, we need people who are willing to stand up and be counted. And I do think that, at the end of the day, politics is about politics. And if your elected officials understand that you care about this stuff, they are probably going to behave in a different way. And our big problem was we were going into an election with an unpopular prime minister. Nobody wanted to be allied with any of his policies because they thought the other guy was going to win. And there was a vacuum. And so you had all the blah, 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 blah on one side, and you had absolutely no one standing up and saying, wait a minute, we need immigrants, we value immigrants, etc. And we had a huge vacuum. And I think it's the absence of leadership that got us where we are. Sorry, Kathleen, you're muted.
Hitting the wrong button. Yeah, we've heard, or you were talking about the lack of leadership. I think it's very similar in the United States in that the leadership voice has been has been quiet, and it's been the citizens, such as we've seen in particularly in Minnesota, that have led the fight. What about in Mexico, Elisa? Do you have any comments in regard to that point or anything in regard to changes?
Yeah, thank you very much. In the Mexican case, I believe that some beneficial reforms would require moving away from a logic of containment and probably toward a model grounded in child protection and international protection. So this means first reducing reliance on custody-based responses and strengthening community-based alternatives.
There must be a glitch, Alyssa. We're not hearing you. She's probably lost her internet connection.
Process through delay, transfer, or containment, rather than through timely refugee status determination. Also, we need stronger coordination among institutions which work on these issues because we have fragmented responsibilities. And this creates institutional gaps that children end up paying for. And well, I believe that probably this would be, the main beneficial reforms that we would require in Mexico. So I believe that the core is not only improving services, but redesigning the system so that protection becomes its organizing principle, especially with children. So uh, a key
Mm.
reform would be to strengthen the system.
Alyssa, we're losing your connection. Perhaps we can come back to you if it gets stabilized there. There is a question from Camilla for Wendy. She asks, how do you explain the lack of medical doctors in Canada versus the low possibilities of recertification of foreign educated doctors?
We're stupid. And we have stupid processes. And, I work with a group called Internationally Trained Medical Doctors, and I can tell you that we have, field surgeons from from IRC, from the International Committee of the Red Cross. We have incredibly talented people who are not allowed to practice medicine. And a lot of it has to do, in my view, with protectionism and also the way in which the model works. So we have people come to Canada, they go and they register for school in Buffalo, just south of the border, get certified in the US, and then come back to Canada because it's a faster pathway. The big barrier in Canada is not passing the exams. They pass the exams with flying colors. It's getting the residency placements to get the work experience that is the big barrier. And frankly, just a lot of the hospitals and medical schools argue that they don't have enough funding. I mean, my view is my son-in-law was a medical resident in the United States. If they just stopped making them work 80 hours a week and had two who worked 40 hours a week, they could double the number of placements. But there are issues around the processes that they feel are necessary to protect us that I think are dysfunctional and simply don't make sense. There are lots of countries that do that way better than we do.
Thanks, Wendy. Alyssa is still trying to get back online, and we'll get back to her. There's a question, Grace, unless you are seeing any other questions, the question about citizenship for migrant workers. How does it work in each of the countries, or doesn't work in some cases?
There is another question, but let's do the one you just said first.
Okay, all right. Nershila, do you have any response to the question of a pathway to citizenship in the US?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question because we know that I'll also ask if Kathleen can share it too, Kathleen Bush. But what I know is because I live here in California is that a lot of the citizenship policies, obviously a lot of the immigration policies are really shifting. So a lot of people who have placed citizenship applications, a lot of it may probably be on hold at the moment or not even in process. I don't even have the numbers for that. But I know that just by speaking to a couple of the community members. I live in California. I live in the Bay Area, and the Bay Area is a very global place. We have obviously innovation capital here. This is the epicenter of technology. So we are seeing a lot of people that are being impacted by these policy changes, especially those on visas who are working for large scale companies and or maybe in the pathway of immigration. So we don't know what that's going to look like moving forward, but definitely there's an impact there, and there will be an impact. Obviously, citizenship does impact your healthcare and well-being and what you get access to. So I don't have the numbers to share there, but there's going to be there are a lot of issues, and again, a lot of this depends on federally. There is a citizenship requirement, and it's different for different people depending on your circumstances. But when it comes to obviously healthcare access, it state by state it all operates very differently. So. I would recommend if anyone in the US is asking that question to really look at the state that you live in to ask that to see the healthcare portion. But I'm gonna actually hand it off to Kathleen because I think she can provide a better answer for this too.
No, thanks, Sheila. I mean, you're absolutely right in highlighting how difficult it is for people to try to become citizens, even if you do come in the quote unquote right way and you come in with a visa. And that was partly why I was highlighting the delays at US citizenship and immigration services, because you can have barriers in law and you can have barriers in operations. And the US has these caps on the number of people who can come in as green card holders, so put them on that faster process towards citizenship. Those caps mean that it can take certain nationalities an entire lifetime to be able to get permission to come in. So for certain Indian nationals, for example, it can take 90 plus years. I apologize. I think my AirPods just died on me. Sorry about that. Hopefully you can still hear me. But the other, kind of delays come from these old paper-based systems at US Citizenship and Immigration Services. But I just want to make sure too that people know that when we're talking about the almost 14 million people who don't have lawful status in the United States, that's partly because for a lot of people who are here, they do not have a pathway forward. There is not a way for them to quote unquote get right with the law as of right now. So some people could leave the country, but then because of barriers in place currently, they would have to wait outside the country, sometimes for 10 years or more, to then try to wait in these long delays with the country caps to come back in with a visa and basically restart the process that way. So some of the reforms that people are looking at would actually allow, for example, the spouses of US citizens to not have to do that, to not have to leave, wait outside the country for maybe a decade, and then come back in. But, this is a really difficult moment, and certainly the Trump administration is mostly focused on mass deportations, right? But I think there is going to be the potential for Congress to be looking at some of these narrower solutions, like I was mentioning, for people brought here as children, or for farm workers, or for healthcare workers, as we've been talking about. There's a huge need in the US as well.
Thanks to both of you. Grace, you said there was another question that arose.
Yes, there's a question from Bettina H. And she says, when we want to help, is there a foundation any of you would recommend for donations for someone coming from Europe? And I suppose you could answer it for someone coming from wherever, but I
I
don't know
think the
who would like
US
to
needs
take
the
that.
most help. Who's got a foundation in the States that will
Yeah,
will
I
help on these issues?
thank you for saying that. Yeah, I do think the US needs a lot of help right now. So it's very apparent in all areas. I don't have one particular foundation, to be honest with you, but that's very kind of you to ask. But if anyone does, I think we can definitely share it. I think for me personally, I donate a lot to like education and children's education primarily, because that means so much to me because I was given a lot of scholarships to pursue my dreams in the state, and it obviously it has led me to here, and I truly believe in that and supporting populations. But I think Kathleen put something in the chat, so please look at that.
Uh, Thanks. Yeah, I was just gonna add that what I dropped in there is a resource I share frequently because it's a place where you can put your zip code if you're in the United States, and it'll show you the local immigration focused organizations, as well as if you're trying to find pro bono legal assistance. And so that's a great place to start. A lot of these organizations are extremely overwhelmed and they always need volunteers. So, in particular, if you have language skills, you don't have to be an attorney to help. You can really just help people fill out forms and navigate the process, and that can be a huge benefit as well.
I might just encourage all of you to take a look at the different resources that have been posted in the chat. I don't think that the chat messages will be a part of the recording. So if you want to grab something now, take a look at that chat box. We usually come back to the final question in regard to what can we do? We've been hearing some of the things that policymakers can do and those who are in charge of regulations. What about as individuals or as organizational advocates? Are there particular recommendations that any of the speakers have to share? Nershila, are you shaking your head?
Yes, I was. I was actually going to drop an organization that I know, so I was going online to do that. But sorry, but there is an organization that I am a part of as well. It's they are working on women's health policies of all types, from from healthcare access to innovation support to research, and they're just massively growing. So I was going to drop that on the chat, and anyone in the US can definitely check that out. And I'll just put in some other organizations. This one in particular is a national organization, and I know that many states have their own chapter, so please look into it. And you can attend a lot of the monthly, bi-weekly, whatever types of meetings that they have. So definitely take a look at that as a resource. And another thing I wanted to mention is look at, if you're again in the States, look at your particular region you live in and check out community-based organizations. These are local organizations that are located throughout your specific zip code area, and that will definitely help you to learn like what sorts of services are available. I'll put all of this down in the chat bot, and also there's another one called Find Help. This is actually more for accessing resources that are low cost, but they have so many organizations by zip code, and potentially you can look into them. And if there's anything that you find that's sort of for like mental health care or for housing support or for your for like healthcare access of some sort, I think that would be wonderful. And your library in the US is a great resource too. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I might point out that WGUSA has partnered with the Institute of International Education. These are for women, or not just women, but we have focused our part of the partnership on the women scholars that are coming from other countries that need financial assistance. And as we have done in some cases, some kinds of encouragement and discussions with them on particular needs that they have. The Canadians probably are kind of familiar with this program because some of these scholars who have been studying in the United States have had to flee our country into your country to continue their education and remain safe. So that's an institutional, organizational action that has addressed in some small way women in education that have had to flee their own countries. Any other concluding comments or questions that people might have?
I
Uh,
just,
go
I wanted
ahead.
to just
Go ahead, Wendy.
Sorry, I just wanted to add a couple of comments because I noticed that Tracy Ramsey from Unifor is here, and she made some really important points that I didn't have a chance to make, which is we do have issues with the exploit, in addition to the underemployment and the things that I talked about. We also have issues with exploitation and lack of protection for temporary foreign workers and potential exploitation by their employers, and that's something we have to be aware of. She also noted, and again, this is really important, that while there are pathways for temporary foreign workers to become permanent residents, to become citizens, often the criteria that are applied are out of reach. And I had an experience with an employee, in fact, who was an international student who couldn't pass. He was perfectly capable of doing all the work I had for him, but he couldn't pass the level of English that was required for his permanent residency. And we actually invested several $1,000s getting him private lessons so he could get through the process. But that's a luxury a lot of international students, temporary foreign workers, and so on don't have. So there is, I would argue, a privileging of formal education and language skills, often in areas where it really doesn't matter. And I remember talking to someone in the trades who said, can they read a blueprint? If I put them in the corner, do they know what to do with a piece of drywall or whatever? We shouldn't be applying the same standards to people who are going to work in labor or in skilled trades that we're applying to university professors. So we've got some problems for sure in that alignment that have to be addressed as well, both for economic reasons, but also to be fair.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Barbara for any concluding remarks and thank yous.
It's always a bit of fun. Okay, so I'm not sure. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. So both CFUW and later on I'll ask Laura Costa from FEMO to also say a few words. I want to thank all of the speakers. It was incredibly informative description of what is happening in each of our countries. And I think that this opportunity to look at justice from a perspective of how it affects women as they migrate to our respective countries and in terms of what happens to them within the countries that they travel to. So from my perspective, I want to thank all of these speakers for the work that they put into in terms of producing their sections for today. It's very gracious of each of them to have undertaken it, and we are cognizant of all of the work that you put in. Laura, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Barb. Dear colleagues and friends, on behalf of the CAMEUS group, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who joined us for our webinar. It was truly inspiring to see our community come together to reflect on such a pressing issue, the situation of migrant girls and women in North America. The discussion highlighted the urgent need to address administrative violence and health problems faced by these vulnerable populations. So I would like to extend a very special thank you to Barb de Moulin, President of CAMEUS, for her leadership and dedication in organizing this vital space for dialogue. My sincere appreciation also goes to the representative of the Federations of University Women in Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Your collaboration is essential for our shared mission of working for equality and justice for women. And finally, we are profoundly grateful to our four distinguished speakers for sharing their expertise and insights. Kathleen Bosch Joseph, Nishila Chan, Elisa Ortega Velasquez, and Welly Coquier. And we hope that this knowledge shared today will serve as a catalyst for our continued advocacy and collective action across the North America. So thank you so much.
A special thank you also to all of the support staff that has helped us today. We're from WGUSA. Thank you to Dr. Faye Weber, who is here today with a broken arm. Kathleen Laura, a moderator, did your excellent job in oversight on this session. From CFUW, I'd like to thank Grace Hollett for her ongoing guidance and continued support. And from FEMU, Dr. Andia Sanchez. And of course, Laura, you just recently provided our thank you notes. So to our support staff at the office, Jamie Bajan, our executive director, and Camila Tepe, our national advocacy and policy specialist. Thank you also to all of the attendees today for your support in viewing our webinar and for your continued interest in the topic of justice for women and girls, particularly migrants. So thank you very much. Welcome to our presentation. My name is Barbara Dumoulin. I am the chair of CAMEUS. CAMEUS